Can you all hear me in the back there? Perfect. First of all, it's very, very beautiful here, I have to say. It's delightful to come here, all the way from Scandinavia. I'm from Norway, which is a country that has seen a lot of changes in the past 100 years. And, I'll give you a small example on that. For example, this jacket, it's Norwegian clothing. Inside here, there's tractors and champagne glasses. And it says here, made with love. Wait, I'll do this. Made with love by really, really pretty blonde girls inside. And 15 years ago, this would have been impossible to say in Norway. I mean, really, because we've always had something called the jantelov. If you're familiar with that. Never try to be better than anyone else. That's sort of like crushing down on us. But it's sort of disappearing a little bit. And that's changing our identity a little bit also, little by little. So now we can actually sell clothing like this in Norway, and it sells, which is rather strange, but I'm here to talk about identity and the way I meet identity when I travel around. So I would like to invite all of you on a little journey around the world with some photos and to try to tell you how I'm able to meet identity in more ways than one. In a sense. I'm a historian. I travel around the world to places like this. This is in Georgia. I collect DNA from small populations. There we are. Living in isolated pockets on places as far away from roads and cities as you can come, because that's where you find good DNA for history research. And right now, the DNA technology is really thriving. It's so exciting to see how much people are able to find out now, scientists and researchers all around the world. And I can see now that in the history books, in our history books today, a lot of things are going to change in the next 10 years or so. And partly this is because of new technologies like DNA. And I'd love to be a part of that also. Here we are this is less than 2 weeks ago in Georgia, in the Caucasus Mountains, where we were, and also we went to Chechnya. And we are not only working with living DNA, so to say. How do we collect DNA? Well, we go into people's mouths with a Q-tip of some sort, and we take DNA out, and then we can try to find out new things. I'll talk a little bit more about DNA in a little bit. But we also work with skeleton material, really old skeleton material. Like this is a leg bone, about 3,000 years old. My friend from the University of Copenhagen here is doing the DNA extraction. And here we are again looking for Vikings in the Caucasus Mountains. It's sort of a Thor Heyerdahl myth we are hunting that may not be correctly historical-wise, but sort of like just hunting for Viking. Actually, it's Viking gods we're hunting for. And Georgians, they love this. When we come there and say we're looking for Vikings, they cheer and they take us into their pubs and force a lot of alcohol in us. I want to feel like brotherhood of a Viking brotherhood of some sort. Here I'm in Chechnya. This is Friday, less than 2 weeks ago. Watch the screensaver on the side there. It's a very warrior-like nation, and I was a little bit afraid to go there because I had to go in alone. My friend, the DNA researcher, he weren't able to obtain a visa. Probably because he's Danish. It's easier when you're Norwegian to get a visa to Russia because we share the same border. So I went in all alone and being sort of like received as a Viking, not as a Norwegian, not as a Scandinavian that much, but as a Viking among Chechens who love Vikings for some reason. They're crazy about Vikings. There are some new things there. I never knew a Lada could drive in 140 miles per hour, but it can, the new Ladas at least. So it was all about that being tough and that, I guess, stereotype in being a Viking or something. And this is also from the border in Azerbaijan, where I was a year ago, and collected DNA up in the mountains towards the border of Russia, is this. Also collecting DNA from living persons here, and trying to find out more about historical connections and where we come from. Now DNA, I experience DNA in a lot of ways. And I meet DNA when I travel to the Easter Island, and when I travel to Italy or France searching for Normans, when I work on projects involving Christopher Columbus or Alexander the Great. I'll show you a little bit about this project and what kind of problems I meet, identity-wise. For example, in Georgia, they love Vikings there too, obviously, for some reason. And the fact that we were looking for Vikings there meant that we had to come into almost every home and have lunch, and the hospitality is great. But they expect you to love alcohol for some reason. So they have 14 toasts every meal. First toast for the women, and the daughters, and then the families, and then the gods, and then so on. And the father of this house at the vineyard, he came out with this horn, and you're a Viking, you must drink from this horn, and all at once and everything. It's not really easy to work as effective after lunch as before lunch on these days. But it's fun. It's great fun. And also we have to remember, when you are traveling like this and trying to obtain DNA samples from people, it's all about a little trust and chemistry. And the best way to meet someone and start a collaboration, apparently, in some countries, is to get drunk together. Because then, I guess you learn more about the person by seeing how they handle their drink, or I don't know, something like that. And luckily, it all went well there, but that drink like a Viking thing, in terms of identity, is something I met a lot of places around in the world, especially among Irish people, or Australians, or New Zealanders, Kiwis. Whenever they see me, they say, "Oh, you're a Viking, come to have a beer with us." They think I like beer as much as they do. And also, they expect me to be tough, or to be able to fight for some reason. That there's this concept they have, just because I'm from Norway and from Scandinavia. And I meet it all the time. And as I said, Norway has changed a lot in the past 100 years. But there are a few things that don't seem to change that much. That is some of these core, I guess you can say values, but something to do with identity. That kind of sticks. I know from history research in Norway, for the past 30 years, there hasn't been much research on Vikings. And why? Well, there has been this tradition to focus on other things. Vikings were sort of elitist people, and there was sort of more up and down way of researching history in Norway. For 30 years. We call it the 68ers, and the way research was steered in a sense. And that's all letting go a little bit, so now we're allowed to research on new things like DNA and history research and trade, which has also been a little bit no-no. And it's all part of that change, I guess, that we see in Norway. Not so much in Sweden, by the way. Can I ask you, how many here are Scandinavian, have some kind of Scandinavian heritage here? You have some. Oh, nice to meet you. And are Norwegians? Okay. Swedish? And Finnish? And Danish? Some Danish. And some have more hands in there at the same time. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Let's see here now. And let me ask you, how many of you celebrate Columbus Day every year? Hands up on that? Like it's sort of celebration, like it's Columbus Day. Italian Americans, I guess, are the ones who normally in the US traditionally celebrate Columbus Day. And we're doing a research project on Christopher Columbus. Because as a historian, and I look on the historical sources. If Christopher Columbus was of nobility, he was a noble person, so to say, he probably was not from Genoa, he probably wasn't Italian, but somewhere in Northern Europe. And now we might be able to find that out by looking into the DNA of the family of Christopher Columbus, which is here. Sorry, which is here. This is in the Dominican Republic and in the Caribbean. And there are several family members of Christopher Columbus. We don't care so much about where Christopher Columbus himself is, because there's so much dispute about where his remains are. But we can work on his brother, for example, or his son or grandson, which are in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. But what if you find out that Christopher Columbus actually was Polish? Because there's a theory that he was Polish, for example, or Norwegian, or French, or something. What would that do to all the 15 million plus Italian Americans who celebrate Columbus Day? It's I think October 13th this year. These new challenges, that we can have new revelations and new truths. You say that? Truths? Well, excuse my English, I'm Norwegian. It's a little bit challenging. I meet this in many countries when I travel around. People don't want change. They don't want these new truths and new ways, I guess, of looking at the world that can give us some perspective. And I'm sort of like on the opposite end. I think we shouldn't be afraid of that. If we find out something new, that Christopher Columbus was Polish, with a lot of Polish Americans then start celebrating the second Monday of October every year, for example. Well, let me tell you something a little bit about DNA. This is how, well, basically women have traveled around the world for 160,000 years, but it's the mitochondrial DNA, and here it's shown inherited through daughters in a straight line, how we're able to trace how people have moved into the Americas, for example. And this is the same with the Y chromosome, only men and their sons and so on. And why are there these differences here in letters? Well, that's mutations. We're all born with mutations, and some work and some don't work. And sometimes some of those mutations that work give us sort of like a leadership locally, so we'll be able to have more children, and so it's spread. Especially the way we have lived for tens of thousands of years in smaller groups. If you think about Waterworld with Kevin Costner, that old guy, he was born with mutations, he could swim and stuff, sort of like that. But nowadays, if a person was born with a really good sitting gene, that would be great for sitting down, since we're sitting down so much. In Russia, for example, in Siberia or something, I don't think that would spread that easily as it has done, as we see here in the past, because our world is changing so much, and it's not necessarily if I have a special gene that I'm able to have more offspring than other persons who don't share that gene. So this is sort of like historical and the way we can look back. And these are some of the answers we get. This is the haplogroup I for men, Y chromosome. And here you can see there are a lot of this in Scandinavia, and for some reason in the Balkans. And I don't know who these people in Sardinia are sharing this, but this, we can use this for statistical purposes. But it's difficult if you find a person with this Y chromosome haplogroup and say, oh, he's a Viking, for example. That's difficult. Look at this one. I just took this with to show you something on the MT at the end DNA, on the women's side. This is one of the things that have puzzled people a lot in the past 10 years. It's the X haplogroup. It's a lot of it is here and there. But if they travel this direction over here, they should have left offspring along the way. That's what we see with other migrations. I mean, unless you do this in a really, really short time. But there's no way they just travel all at once over there. And so those are the things that puzzles people in a way. And I think they might have solved that now actually, but a lot of people thought that they actually went this way along the ice and came into the Americas in that direction, which may not be correct. Anyway, this is from the National Geographic Society. They have a big project, the Geographic project. They went with me to Morocco one time, Spencer Wells, and they told me a lot of things about these blonde, blue-eyed people living in the Atlas Mountains in Africa, high up in the mountains, Berber tribes. And they don't know why they're there, or why they're looking so different from Africans. And I've been there, and I'll show some photos of there in just a bit. But this is the empty DNA for women, mainly, haplogroup H. And here you can see how in yellow some migrations have come into Europe. And it turns out that my mother, and also my empty DNA that I've inherited from my mother, is something called H2. And if I look around the world and see who in the world has the most of that as a tribal group, it's the Berber tribes in Libya, among the two I believe. There's over 60% that's the same as I have. It's all really long time ago, but not so many Europeans have exactly that haplogroup. So I found that a little bit curious. Maybe I should go down there and see if I see some resemblance. In Scandinavia, you have four, or at least three main types of DNA, which is the I that I mentioned before, I1, and these are the ones who came first. And then we have two migrations into Europe from the east, and these are the first ones, the Celts, Celtic tribes, and when the second group came, which is this group, R1A, when they came, they pushed these Celts further to the west of Europe. But they're pretty similar. There's this R1B and R1A. And then there's one that I think is a little bit interesting, because we're doing some research on that now. And this is the Q haplogroup. This is men, right? And it seems like this haplogroup has entered Scandinavia pretty late. And there's a theory now. There's this Danish archaeologist. She's actually quite serious, but she says this is Attila and the Huns. The Huns, right? After they ravaged and pillaged in Europe, when they stopped this in the 5th century, they went into Scandinavia and are the forefathers of the Vikings. So we might be able to do a little bit of research and have some results on that pretty soon, I hope. But it's an interesting theory, mostly because this woman, Lotte Hedehage, mostly because she's a very serious scholar, so you can't ridiculate her in a sense, like with Thor Heyerdahl, for example, like he experienced a lot with his theories. Oh, we jumped a little bit too far here now. So in a sense, we can trace these migrations around the world and see how we're all connected, and sometimes this tells us a little bit more about identity. And I'll show you here on the Easter Island. Has anyone been to the Easter Island here? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, not so, no way. So, more in general on the Easter Island. There are 3 volcanoes, there and there and there. And there's an airplane strip there, and a town is there where everyone lives, about 4,000 people. And this picture is taken from over there at this volcano. And right here is a small volcano where they made all these statues. This is from the outside, and this is from the inside of the volcano. And this is Dorita. She's an anthropologist, and she has been with me on many of these expeditions because she's very good in Spanish, but she's also very good with people. She has that people skill. And when we come and want DNA, and here we took blood samples, it's not just to ask. So she's very good, connecting a little bit there and making everything sort of serious without the use of alcohol that we see in all places. So this is inside this volcano, And here is a picture of Thor Heyerdahl when he was on the island, and we were actually following Thor Heyerdahl theory, this Norwegian explorer who was on the Easter Island. And here you can see how big these statues really are. The hands are at the bottom here, and it's not only easy to move these, and that's why the trees disappeared, and then when everything sort of, why war emerged just before the Europeans came, or sometime before. So we went to around, so we went around and interviewed the elders to try to find those people who had the most of the indigenous Rapa Nui DNA. Out of a population of 4,000, we found only 42. And everyone else is too much mixed. And for some reason, there was this Danish guy in the 1870s who apparently had a lot of sex. Because every time we had a hope to get past him, we sort of like, oh, we went to the family tree. Oh, yeah, that's that Danish guy. Okay. So I don't know what he did about during the 10 years he was there, but he's got a lot of offspring. But we found these 42, and of these 42, 22 agreed to give us some of their blood so we could research a little bit on their origins, in the sense that there's this theory that not everyone is from Polynesia, but some are from South America. And we actually found some traces of the DNA from South America among these 22. And we're doing more research on skeleton remains to try to see if we can find some more solid proof from that. But the reason, there are two horses in this picture, by the way. Just, I know people ask them sometimes when they see. But when we spent the night up here, this was the last night we spent up here, the people that own these horses and took us around, they sort of like, well, got to know us a little bit, I guess, and they sort of opened up on the last night. These are men, traditional men, really old, some of them also. And, well, basically, they all got wasted and high, and then they sort of opened up, so maybe it wasn't us. But they told us some really disturbing things about losing their identity, losing their culture. And that's something we heard when we were there 2 weeks, and we really got into, close to the people in a whole different manner than you as a tourist. And there was a woman, a local woman who helped us, and she's a nurse, and she knew all the people, and she would also hear all the stories and could confirm what we heard. And Dorita, on the other horse here, she told us that this, as an anthropologist, she spent a lot of time on Greenland, among the Inuit tribes there, and she's seen a lot of parallels there about losing your identity, so to speak. They got one celebration on the Easter Island each year in January, and it's all touristic. There's nothing left of their old culture at all. They feel, at least, when they complain to us. And there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of alcoholism, and the stories we heard wasn't all that good at all. It was disturbing, really. And the parallel with the societies in Greenland are typical in a social anthropological way. When a culture diminishes and the people who remain and try to hang on to their identity, it sort of a lot of bad situations can come out, especially within families. That's something we saw there, and that's a way, I guess, identity works also sometimes, that you need some kind of identity. And if you have a culture that is disappearing or evolving into something else, like on the Easter Island, a lot of touristy things, you always need some kind of identity, so you need help to replace what you have with something new. And in terms of identity, I'm a historian, right? So I like the longer perspective always, and I'd like to because I told you all that about Vikings and me traveling out and meeting people, and I'm now put in a box where I like to fight and drink beer all the time, for example. Well, there are some phrases that you can, like a red line, follow back in history. And for example, Napoleon. I'll tell you a thing about Napoleon. He wasn't from, did you say Corsica, right? Yeah, he wasn't from Corsica originally. His family was of Lombard nobility from Italy. And I mentioned him because he's Napoleon, so it's a good tagline or something. Because he was Lombard, and the reason why Lombard exists today in northern Italy is especially the region, the strong economical region around Milano. All of them know very, very much what Lombard, like identity, or what it means in the terms of identity. And 800 years ago, there was something called the Lombard League that sort of a lot of these future city-states would make a league to protect themselves against the aggressive northern behavior of northern Europe. And that Lombard League lasted for 100 years about. But why Lombard? Well, 600 years earlier, the Lombards, they were called Longobardi, long beards. And they have their own, they wrote down, let's see how many years ago now, about 1400 years ago, they wrote down their own origins story. They came from Scandinavia, across the seas, so Sweden or Norway, I guess, and came down there and took over Italy. And they were called Longobardi, and that term became Lombard. And many of these noble families were still rich and ruling in the different city-states throughout the centuries. And so you can trace sort of one word and connect it with identity, just like Viking. And that puts a lot of things in your head. And the Italians certainly do that with Lombard, for example. I'll give another. This is from a Gothic festival in Germany in 2011. I was not there. Why? I, as a historian, find it very strange that people can dress like this and listen to Gothic music and feel something about identity to this, because I don't think it's silly at all, because I will not judge at all. But I find it history-wise very interesting, because the reason why Gothic or Goth music exists is because of Gothic literature in the 19th century, right? Dark literature, horror, and all of these horrible stories. And the reason why Gothic literature or fiction exists is because of the 16th century and the Renaissance. A lot of people in southern Europe needed, especially in Italy, needed to blame someone for the fall of the Roman Empire. And that's why they said, oh, everything bad that destroyed the Roman Empire, that was Gothic. And so the word Gothic was then forever emphasized as something really, really evil and bad. And for some reason, Gothic architecture was named during that time. And Gothic architecture is really Norman architecture, meaning the Vikings who settled in Normandy and later after 1066 expanded out to Normandy to England and Italy, and took a lot of this architecture with them. It's sort of like, is it doom-like? It's a little bit scary, I guess. At least if you go there. This is in Ems in Germany. And the reason why Gothic, well, this is Theodoric the Great, who lived in the 6th century, and he was the one who took over Italy just after the Roman Empire, and has sort of been blamed for the fall of the Roman Empire. But there was a lot of course, history-wise, not only one person, not only, he was Ostrogoth, there were some Visigoths there too, and a lot of other tribes, German tribes that came south. And in this way you can see how Gothic can survive like a red line throughout history, and just one word Gothic makes you think a lot of things, just like one word Lombard, or just like one word Viking, gives you an urge maybe to drink beer for some reason. So let me go to this other place. I mentioned the Atlas Mountains, and these blonde people who lived up there. I wanted, this is sort of like a peculiar story, I've been told in a lot of ways. I'll tell it the simplest way. I wanted to go there and take DNA of these people and see if we can find some connections. And the answer, I'll give you now in just a bit, is truly interesting, spectacular in a sense, at least in Norway, and a little bit controversial, not just a little bit. So I wanted to go there, and I had this connection through the family of Thor Heyerdahl, and I was able to get into the court of the King of Morocco, right here, who at the time was in Tantan, sort of like just inside the Sahara Desert, at this nomad festival. So we went there, and at this court there was a lot of people, strange people. You can find everything. There were Explorers Club members from New York and film producers from Hollywood. There was one direct descendant from the Prophet Muhammad who took me aside until 3 a.m. and wanted to talk about evolution versus creationism. And there was this guy. He's the brother of Osama bin Laden. Tariq is his name. He's the sort of like controls the real estate activity in the bin Laden family. And he took us aside also. I might tell you a little bit of that story, because we were sitting on the bus going back to this luxury hotel after a day at the Nomad Festival, and we're all sitting, and all the VIPs are sitting in there, and I'm sort of just waiting to meet either the king or the king's right hand and ask for permission to go up in the mountains and collect DNA. So I'm sort of like waiting for this while we attend all these activities. And when we go out of the bus, there's like 50 yards, 70 yards, I guess, to go to the hotel. So I go down to grab my bag from underneath the bus. And I had a little longer hair than now, and blonder also. And as I grabbed down there, these some belly boys, you say that, from the hotel come running and wanted to grab my bag, right? So all I hear is, "Madame," and he grabs my bag. And he's like this tall, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I can be a woman." So he grabs my bag, and Dorita at that time, on the left there, she has short hair, and she's a really muscular cyclist living in Spain. She's from the Faroe Islands, that's why the name Dorita. But she's really muscular, and nobody asked her. So she took her 2 small backpacks, and then we walked these 70 yards to the hotel. And me and my guy holding my bag, and Dorita with her 2 bags on her back. And we pass Tariq bin Laden on the way to the hotel, and he sees this, and he's appalled. He's just amazed. And he stops us when we come into the foyer. Really nice Moroccan-style foyer with the musically spinning hats, if you've seen that. He stops us, and we stop there and we talk for an hour. And he starts by addressing me and saying, "You can't treat women this way." Because he thought I was being very, very ungentlemanlike. He thought she was my wife and had to carry everything. And I sort of so I found that rather amusing. So he just sort of like got out, and we had been observing him throughout this festival. People were lining up to talk with him. There were security guards, always tailing for people standing in line wanting to pitch him IDs. But he just kept everyone distance, sat down with us on the couch, and then he understood that she was not my wife or something like that. She was actually working for me. And it was a whole different matter. He started talking more to her directly. Wanted to change her, make her a better woman. And Dorita, the picture is lying on the bed, she was a little bit taller than me too, and yet suddenly says, "So tell me, Mr. bin Laden, how do you want me to be a better woman?" And he answered pretty well for himself. He said, "Well, you shouldn't go in these trousers like that because your masculinity comes out much too much. You should have long red dresses." And he kept on. And Dorita was a little bit put off, of course, I guess. And he also talked about his brother, because this was in 2006 or something, and he hadn't been caught. Now, mind you, this is the half-brother, and there are, I think, 25 brothers in the family. Half-brothers and mixed, right? But he talked a little bit about his brother also for an hour over there. And it was very much so kind of communication. Just like probably like when Vikings used to travel out and talk, really tough but humorous, and it was very fruitful, as we say in Norway, communication. It's very interesting, and in the end he offered Dorita to come with him for 3 days on a luxury 7-star hotel on an island east of Africa somewhere. I didn't know they had a 7-star hotel there, but and he said, "You come out as a better woman." I thought I had lost her. Actually, the question was hanging in the air, but I saw that Dorita was thinking of this. But she said no, and that was the end of that. And we have talked about this situation many times after, because it's a great story. So, but it doesn't end there, because he said, "You should come to Yemen, because that's where my family is from," he said, "and I'll prove to you, using your DNA research, that humans didn't originate in Africa, but in Yemen. I know exactly where to send you." All right. Well, I wasn't sure about going to Yemen, but in any case, just to be polite, I wrote him a letter an email. 3 weeks later, I sent him this photo, and I said, "Well, Mr. Tariq Rinaldi, if you want to set me up with your contacts, I can at least, send some emails and see what the theory is all about." And he wrote back 1 hour later, and it was clearly his own writing in the email. And he started writing, "Dear Miss Ellingvåg." And he thought I was her. He didn't care about DNA or original people. He thought she was actually wanting to pick up on that offer he had made her. So he said, "Sure, come along." and I decided not to go. I would come out as a different woman after 3 days. So these are some of the experiences that you can have when you travel out. You just see what picks up, and then you can go and continue researching in this way. And we did end up getting a no from the King of Morocco to go up in the mountains, because, as not he said, but the middlemen, as they said, we have enough problems southwards on the border there. And these people, we know there's a lot more of them in our area. So if you find out something about their DNA, they might find out that, oh, but we belong to these people in Algeria. And then we'll have a new border conflict going east. And we don't want that. So we don't want any research on this at all. This was kind of sad. But Spencer Wells, he was with us on this trip of the National Geographic Society, he actually found some DNA later on from other Berber tribes, also in Algeria. Here, by the way, we went up into the mountains. This is going up in the Atlas Mountains. We have to go far, because there are many roads there. We have to go as far away from roads as possible. Up in the highlands, there is a small village with a mosque. And here there were 3 villages. And we went to 2 of these 3, and I guess these are Berber tribes, nomads. All the boys stick together and the girls are running up there. It was great to meet these people, very rich culture, and nomad culture. And this is the local chieftain, that is me. And this is where we're there to have some dance in the evening. And then the women came out with the children and showed, look, she's blonde and she's blue-eyed, and they wanted to show us all of this. And it turns out that, this is from Spencer Wells at the National Geographic Society, or a Geographic Project, is what it's called. These Berber tribes, they are most closely connected or linked historically to Sami people far north in Scandinavia. And that's something to think about, the mountains of Africa and far north in Scandinavia. What does that mean? History-wise. Well, it turns out that Sami people might not be indigenous after all. And Spencer Wells, he says, they only came to Scandinavia 3,000 years ago, meaning there's been people living there already 6,000 years before that. And that's a big thing in Norway, especially among the Sami people in all Scandinavia, because they have this whole independence drift or drive-outs where they want a lot of money and want to see their identity in this way, sort of, and as indigenous. And it turns out they might not be indigenous after all. So this is a way identity can meet you in other places also, because when this comes out, which it hasn't yet in Norway, there will be quite a fuss. Absolutely. Let me finish off about Alexander the Great. I mentioned him, but we have a project in Thessaloniki in Greece. And we don't know where Alexander the Great, where his corpse is, where his skeleton remains are. But we do know we have the DNA, no, not the DNA, we have the skeletons of his father, his brother, and his son. And this would help us to find out more about him. So we started collaborating with the university in Thessaloniki. They are the ones who are sitting on these skeleton remains. And they were initially very eager to do this. They were wanting to, show the world once and for all that these are actually the father, brother, and the son of Alexander the Great, and they'd love to learn more. Until one of them asked, well, in a meeting in Thessaloniki, one of them asked himself, what if DNA shows that he wasn't Greek? What would we do then? What if DNA shows that he was from God forbid, Macedonia, or Jewish, or Northern Europe, or someplace else? Then we lose our national treasure. We can't have that. And they stopped the project. And I still hope we can be able to do that, because science must be the top priority. New research. We must continue finding out new things. We can't stop and hold on to these the way we think the world and history has been for the past 100 years. That would be living in the 20th century. We don't do that anymore. So I think we should put science and new research at the top priority and find out the DNA of Alexander the Great, wherever he was from. He was blonde, and that doesn't mean much 2,000 years ago necessarily. So hopefully we'll be able to get somewhere there, but we meet a lot of these closed doors all around the world. We also met with Christopher Columbus in the Dominican Republic. I hope you'll be able to open that door, but they're afraid that this might jeopardize the tourism industry, which is very important in the Dominican Republic. And if we find out something new about Christopher Columbus, I would imagine it would be good for the tourism industry. But they're afraid that just touching with it can jeopardize it. If there's a risk, they don't dare to, because it's so much money and so much work, of course. So, well, I can understand that, but hopefully we'll be able to go on with that. And I think I haven't spent too much time now. We have time for questions, yeah. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So just want to finish off, and if any of you have questions, shoot them on. This is just a short journey of how I'm able to work and travel around. I work with anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, and DNA researchers and scientists, and we just follow the ball wherever it's rolling. And last time now in Georgia, I met this archaeologist from Kazakhstan. He said, "You've got to come to the Kurgan graves that we have excavated, and we have the skulls. You just come and drink vodka." And we plan to do that in February. Take a team from Denmark and Norway, and we'll go over and take DNA from these skulls to learn more about the Kurgan graves. And these are in the European roots that we're searching for, and that's also one of the projects here, Indian Himalaya, that will be next year also. Please, if anyone has any questions.
I understand Iceland is the first country that's done a complete DNA study of its population. Can you tell me what some of the findings were from that rather unique effort?
Yeah, on Iceland. there's a man called Ancestrycom, and they have this whole genealogy thing also on Iceland. So they collected all the people's genealogy back to about 1400, and then there's a whole, so not everyone can go back to the Vikings in Norway mostly, but around 1400. And so the whole population, and he showed me, I can check myself, and the president of Iceland, and you can see which is our closest relative. And they're using that with this DNA study collection for cancer research. And it's very, very useful, I've heard. But I haven't read so much on these reports that have come out. But it's a very unique way of seeing how cancer can travel through the families and generations. That's what it's been mostly for. And the other thing they found out, which people on Iceland and people on the Faroe Islands are very amused by, is that most of the men comes originally from Norway, but the women, not necessarily. A lot of them come from the United Kingdom, the British Isles, and it turns out that the Vikings sort of like we joke, you know, they say that's why there's no beautiful women in England. We took them all and took them to Iceland. That's a joke, by the way. but in a sense, they found, that's one thing they found out, that not necessarily, I mean, the culture is very Norse, very much Viking, but the women were adopted into that culture. And I believe it was voluntarily that many of these women came along, because we know from England, Yorkshire, for example, this area, that the local bishops would yell at the peasants for taking off their Vikings in their hairstyle and their beard style. And if these were the pillagers and the rapists, why would they, try to look like them? The Vikings were very, everyone had a code, and it's important how you look. So maybe we have some answers there, perhaps. That maybe was volunteered, I don't know. Another question, please. Here, in front.
What do you think of companies like Ancestry.com as far as finding out your heritage?
Well, I think it's fine. I think it's fine in a way, because you can learn a lot about where your origin is. Normally, up until recently, it's only been straight lines, like your straight father's line. Obviously, you have to have a man in your family, then your father or your brothers or uncles or something, and then you find out that straight line going backwards, or the straight mother's line. So there's a lot of people in between, 214, 1632. There's a lot of people in between that you don't know so much about. But it started with this autosomal, I think it's called in English, kind of research where you can find out more in between also. I'm positive to it, but also you don't find out where your family was 2,000 years ago. You find out where your family was 10,000 years ago and further back in time, which is sort of like really, that's in Stone Age. So it's not all that interesting, but to pay $100 to find out if you're of that or that, it's quite interesting. I'm a little bit skeptical to 23andMe, which is Google's, or the wife of one of the Google founders, because they have this new thing where you can, if you meet a beautiful girl, you can check your DNA and see if you fit, like with diseases and everything, So if you haven't the offspring or not. I'm a little bit skeptical of that. Please, any other questions? Yes, in fact.
It's interesting hearing you talk about how the DNA could lead to sort of a crisis in national identity if you lose people. Can you speak a little bit
to the level of personal identity? You had that you found out your DNA was indicated perhaps your ancestors came from an area you didn't know about. And I think of people who define themselves, I'm more Swedish than anything else, and that led to some decisions I had made. Have you seen that through DNA, people's personal identities sort of get shaken up and disrupted when they find out something about their lineage?
I think it's more a question of fear. against the unknown that you meet a lot, especially with new technologies that you don't really understand necessarily either. I've even seen it in Norway, so yes, I've experienced it really personally, but that's been history professors, quite a lot of older than me that are now retired, but they're very much afraid of this new kind of science because they've been researching their kind of science for so many years, and everything new is a little bit difficult to understand maybe, and to incorporate into their own research, and then as a result they can be very harsh in a sense on what you're allowed to, in which direction you're allowed to study. So in that sense I researched it, but not on a personal level, because I mean, this is mostly statistics, right? So it's more larger groups of people. Of course, if we find out that Christopher Columbus probably was from Poland or Norway, I have some Italian American friends who would personally be very angry with me. So that's something we will have to work out at a later time, in a sense. But I guess this is something that can come more and more often as we move on and as we continue to find out new things about where we're from. I know one of the top anthropologists in the USA in the 60s, he was quite controversial by saying that Neanderthals and humans actually had offspring. And this has since been said, no, that cannot be. But now DNA shows that there is actually, among Asians and Europeans, we have some Neanderthalians. And that's a different species, right? And this is controversial, in a sense. But the question is, what do we do with it? And 700 years ago, if you go to 14, 16, 32, 64 back, we would have like, well, much more than 1 billion ancestors, and there weren't that many people 700 years ago, so we have mixed a lot, you know. So I think all this focus on this new kind of research kind of helps us to more fraternize. Is that the right word? You know, to, like in brotherhood or sisterhood, combined with a new global society. You learn that you have different aspects here and there, but that's good. Yeah, that's my answer. Yeah. Any more questions?
Actually, but if I could follow up on what you were just saying, because I was struck by some of the concerns about free inquiry. For going out there, being able to actually. The mic turned up. There we go. But following up some of the concerns about free inquiry, of going out there and actually being able to collect the samples in some of these places, because of fear of finding out maybe something different about one's lineage. In other words, this fear of threatening the one's national identity. Your immediate statement before was about how there's a possibility of actually understanding this DNA train could pull people together a little bit more. So I'm wondering, as you're steeped in this and working into this idea of who we are as a people worldwide, how much the concerns of one's national identity versus being part of a larger human family, how much you're encountering strains on that?
I'm encountering it a lot on the political level, because people are afraid because they want to maintain political borders that has existed for the past century or more in many nations. And if something new comes along, then you might have to change the border, and that could be could turn out to be a new sort of conflict. And that's in Morocco and in the Caribbean and in Norway, in many places, we find that to be a little bit challenging, yes. And it's not easy to convince bureaucrats sitting in political positions to think new and to not be afraid to open new boundaries and open new doors. So that's a challenge, and that's something we have to continue to work on, actually. And I see more and more researchers are being more and more relentless to this and more focused at new research and science must be the top priority. We can't really, I mean, too many people have in the history of science researched by putting a finger down and said, I want to prove this, and you sort of like aim towards that all the time. That's not research. I mean, you can't do that. So yeah, but I'm thinking, let's take the Netherlands, for example. 10% of Netherlands' population is originally Norwegian, actually. In Netherlands, they know that. In Norway, almost nobody knows that. But also 10% of the Dutch population are originally Huguenots from France, because they were expelled and 88,000 of them moved to the Netherlands, about the same time as all these Norwegians went down. Because we were under Denmark at that time, and the Danish king used Norwegian timber, which we have a lot of, to finance his wars. And all these ships going down to Rotterdam and Amsterdam, a lot of Norwegian families and sometimes villages just went down along with them. They all settled in the north part, but even in New York, some of the founding families of New York have a Dutchified Norwegian surname, which is quite interesting. And in this sense, it's a good thing. You know, it's easier for us if the climate change would go horribly wrong and the water level would rise. Well, we're getting a lot of Dutch people coming up to Norway wanting to live there. It's sort of like brothers who left 400 years ago, so why not? But it's a new way of thinking, I guess, and it's all about the attitude towards it. And if you see this as a problem, you would think problem-wise about it, but you could see it as an opportunity too, of course. I have cousins, I guess, among the two islands in Libya. I haven't visited them, but yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Anything about DNA or history? Okay.